In this section, we get to talk all about blood vessels and how they work and what their job is. In essence, you have a series of tubes that are interconnected that are going to carry blood all around the body. That means they form a closed system. If you have a gap, you have a cut or some sort of injury. For the most part, arteries are going to carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. There are a couple of exceptions that you'll need to know. That blood is carried off to tissues for exchange of gases and nutrients and wastes. The blood will be returned back to the heart, and in general, that is deoxygenated blood. You do need to know a couple of exceptions, but we'll get to that in a later date. And of course, there's the fancy definition of hemodynamics, which is in essence, how do we move blood around the body? And what are the forces and mechanics that are involved? Here are 5 classes of blood vessels that exist. Again, arteries do carry blood away from the heart. It's mostly oxygenated blood. There are a couple of exceptions, as I noted. Arterioles are the smallest branches of those arteries. Arterioles are going to be the key players in controlling blood pressure. From arterioles, blood will move into capillaries, which are tiny blood vessels. They are literally 1 red blood cell in diameter. The exchange of gases and nutrients from blood into interstitial fluid occurs at the level of the capillaries within capillary beds. Venules will pull blood out of those capillaries or accept blood out of those capillaries. They will merge to form veins, and the job of veins is to return blood to the heart. And in general, it is deoxygenated blood. The 2 largest blood vessels are the pulmonary trunk and the aorta. They're about 1 inch in diameter, which is quite large. Capillaries are the smallest, as I noted. There's an incredibly extensive network of capillaries in your body, about 25,000 miles. Holy cow. They're going to be thin-walled to allow for diffusion of gases and nutrients. That's going to be very important. And most cells are not very far away from a capillary. And why is that? Because diffusion is pretty limiting. So you need to have access to a capillary in order to be able to exchange gases and exchange nutrients for wastes, if you're a cell. So arteries are going to be thick-walled and strong vessels that are carrying blood, and that blood is going to be under fairly great pressure. The pulmonary arteries are the arteries that I mentioned before that you need to know about. They carry deoxygenated blood. That's associated with circulatory system in and out of the heart and between the lungs. So the majority of arteries will be carrying oxygenated blood, except for the pulmonary arteries. Absolutely positively know that forever. The walls will have 3 layers. The tunica interna, that'll be an epithelial layer. The tunica media is the thickest layer, that's going to be smooth muscle. And the tunica externa, I learned it as tunica adventitia, is going to be connective tissue. Again, those guys will branch and form those smaller vessels, the arterioles. And arteries actually may combine or unite with branches of other arteries supplying the same region to form what is known as an anastomosis, and we'll talk about that slightly more in depth shortly. They are networks that are basically going to allow for alternative routes for blood to get to tissues. Talked about this. The deepest layer is going to be the artery wall will be the tunica interna, simple squamous epithelium, known as endothelium. It does have a basement membrane. That underlying layer of connective tissue is going to have elastic fibers, which will allow for expansion and contraction of the blood vessels. The tunica media is the thickest layer. Again, smooth muscles, some elastic fibers. And the tunica externa is connective tissue covering. A lot of elastic fibers, a lot of collagen fibers. Remember how collagen has tensile strength. And why do we care about the tunica externa? Because it helps protect the blood vessel, and it's also going to allow for the blood vessels to be attached to surrounding tissues to anchor the vessels in place. Great little video on the structure of arteries. Watch that when you have a few minutes. Artery and pressures. Arteries and pressure. Try that again. The elasticity. Remember how we talked about elastic fibers in those walls? So the elasticity in the walls will allow arteries to be able to handle the pressure waves as the heart beats. How do the walls contract? The sympathetic nervous system will play a role in changing the diameter of a blood vessel. That means that you will have an impact on the heart. You will have an impact on peripheral blood pressure at the arterial level, as well as how much blood and how fast that blood is moving through capillary beds. When you hear the term vasoconstriction, that means there's going to be a contraction of the arterial walls due to the contraction of smooth muscle. The lumen of the vessel will shrink. The lumen is just a fancy way for saying the area through which blood moves. Vasodilation means that those arterial walls are relaxing and the lumen will enlarge. We know that arterioles are little arteries, not as small as capillaries, but pretty small. These guys are going to play a major role in regulating blood flow to capillaries. Vasoconstriction means that you will have decreased blood flow to tissues and at the same time, you will actually have increased blood pressure. And the reverse is true if you're undergoing vasodilation, which means there will be an expansion to the size of the blood vessel and increased blood flow to tissues and decreased blood pressure. So make sure you understand this page. So let's talk about changes in the walls as you move through blood vessels from the heart out to capillary beds. The large vessels are considered conducting arteries. Their job is to move large amount of blood from the heart either to the lungs or the circulatory system. The tunica media is going to contain a lot of elastic fibers, not a lot of muscle cells, and because of that, you'll actually not really have a huge pulse, or you won't be able to feel an enormous pulse. From the conducting arteries, you move into distribution arteries, which are considered muscular. They are medium-sized. The tunica medium is going to be thicker because it's going to contain more muscle cells. And most arteries are considered distribution arteries. From there, we move down to the smaller arterioles. At this level, you don't have a pulse, and the blood flow is relatively even. There's not a huge tunica externa, and there's a thin or incomplete tunica media. But what is there plays a role. Remember how we just talked about this, plays a role in regulating blood flow out to the capillary beds. This shows you a diagram of arteries versus arterioles versus capillaries. In the next section, we're going to focus specifically on capillaries. So stay tuned. More as it happens.